Hey, DynamicsCon Fall 2021. Welcome. Thank you for being here today. We are so pleased that you're joining us. I'm Bob McAdam. I manage strategic partnerships for a company called Cavallo. And for the very first time, Cavallo is sponsoring not one, but two tracks, GP and BC, at DynamicsCon. We're very excited about our expanded sponsorship opportunity here, and we have a lot of really cool stuff to show you today. So we're certainly glad that you're here. Before I get started, a quick thank you to everybody at DynamicsCon for making this show go, especially Molly, Liz, and Rich, my three former colleagues. I know the three of you are hardworking and diligent, and events like this don't go off as well as they do without your expertise. So thank you. People in the community appreciate this. Trust me, I know I count myself as one of them. So congratulations on pulling off yet another successful DynamicsCon. Okay, so Cavallo, you'll find us at cavallo.com. And we are sponsoring GP and BC for the first time, as I said before. If you're sitting in your chair today looking at this presentation from a Dynamics GP perspective, well, you probably know us previously as SalesPad. SalesPad rebranded to Cavallo, which you'll find at cavallo.com at the end of June. The company has had the same name for almost 20 years. We were looking for something new, something to grow into, and now we have it, Cavallo. If you're sitting in your chair today watching this presentation from the Dynamics 365 Business Central perspective, well, it's entirely possible that you have no idea who we are and you've never heard of us. We've never operated in the traditional NAV space before, but now we're jumping into the BC space full force later this year, and we are excited to be there. So if you're looking at us from the BC perspective, you don't know us yet, but you soon will, because we have a lot to offer, particularly in the distribution and light manufacturing spaces. So get ready, because here we come. Quickly though, here is some Cavallo history. The company was founded in 2003, so again, it's almost 20 years old. We write the best distribution software in the mid-market space, period. The company was founded by a distributor. The software was written for distributors. Our GP customer retention rate is at 92%, and our NPS is at 95. Those numbers aren't perfect, but boy, they are really good, and my colleagues and I at Cavallo are working every single day to bring them up, with customers like Gorilla Glue, Sunbum, and Blender Bottle. So we're really excited to show off what we've been doing lately here at DynamicsCon. And next up, you'll hear from Senior Vice President Jeremy Bogart. Jeremy is a 15-year veteran of Cavallo. He is leading the charge internally on all of our new products. So he's been kind of busy lately. He'll be walking you through the important elements of business intelligence and the related deployment of it. Today, there's so much data out there, and people need to harness the data around their business so they can make the best possible decisions and do so quickly. I can't wait for you to see the cutting-edge, unique work that's been done here at Cavallo. Jeremy, thanks for all of your efforts. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Bob. And thanks everybody for joining my session on business intelligence. My name is Jeremy Bogart. I am the product leader at Cavallo. Cavallo is a business management software company focused primarily on mid-market distributors. I myself have been with Cavallo for 15 years, started off as a software developer, moved into consultant roles, worked on custom projects, both large and small. And throughout that time, saw a lot in the business intelligence area. We have a product that is specifically for BI for distributors as well. What I want to cover in today's session is why is data important and why should you be thinking about it? Then a little bit of kind of what is business intelligence and what does that mean for kind of your existing application infrastructure. And then moving on a little bit into determining your needs and then moving on our way into making a plan. So why is data important? So it's always been really important to get information out of your systems. Ultimately, your ERP is a planning tool. It lets you know where you're at as well as be operationally functional. But recently, in the last few years, the reason that this has gotten so much more attention is the tools that process and work with data have gotten so much better. Storage is cheaper than it's ever been before. Computational power is more available than it's ever been before, both from a centralized aspect of being able to do processing in the cloud, but also in more of the intelligent edge concept. So individual devices can now perform processes that used to be, server-based. So as the processing power gets higher and higher and our ability to store more and more data becomes cheaper and cheaper, we will see more and more applications for artificial intelligence on an everyday basis. And you're already starting to see some of these things, with image recognition, facial recognition. You can easily search Google with a picture and find other pictures and have it label what that is. It's a very simple example. On the edge concept, your Snapchat filters are essentially image recognition processing right on your phone. And you see some larger scale enterprise versions of this with things like digital twins. So an example of that is, we're modeling physical environments with sensors and data. So as an example, windmills now have sensors all over them. And they can tell long before the windmill will actually fail and have a problem based on that sensor data. And that's all through machine learning. It's through artificial intelligence and just immense amounts of data. And so every sensor, every vibration is logged and the baselines are kept. And then when there's a failure event, they can look back, annotate the data and say, this is a failure. And you train the algorithms and eventually when your primary rotary sensor is 3 hertz off in vibration, that it probably means you need to go check that windmill. And we're not that far away from being able to do this in applications like cars, and having sensors in cars and having your cars be predictive in these ways as well, because that processing scale is much cheaper. And at some point the cars will be able to do all of that modeling themselves. And so those are some kind of real world applications on the leading edge. But what that means for us and, in business software is those things are coming. And we have to look ahead and think about what those things mean for our business and for our applications. And what it really comes down to is, you can't process and make insights off of data you don't have. And so it's more than just having BI and thinking about, getting reports out. If you really want to be ahead of the curve, you have to start thinking about not only how you're going to get data out, but how much data that you're actually putting in. Because the sooner you start to think about that and the sooner you start to make that plan, the more ready you will be someday to then process and work with it. So even if you're not able to pull it out at the moment, the more and more processes and the more data that you're generating, the better it will be at some point. So thinking about business intelligence and bridging our way into that sort of more futuristic view, how should we think about data and insights in business intelligence? And so there's a couple different categories to think about. The first one is descriptive analytics. And what are descriptive analytics? This is sort of the traditional reporting. This is what you've come to expect out of ERP systems. So this is the production of KPIs. So can I tell what my day sales outstanding is? Can I, produce a balance sheet? Can I pull out transactional reports out of the system? It's just the ability to describe the data as it sits. So can I get information about the current state of things out of the system? So open orders reports, back ordered items reports, PO items to receive, all of those things are descriptive analytics. And honestly, ERP systems traditionally are challenged in this area a bit, even out of the box. So some of them have better reporting than others, but it can be a challenge to even get those operational metrics out of your ERP system. The next step and next logical step is predictive analytics. And so this represents, having a little bit more information and a little more sophistication. This is using models and statistics on top of that data, not just pulling it out and saying, what is the current state, but projecting into the future and being able to answer some questions about the way that things will be based on the way they were in the past. So examples of this in the real world are things like setting inventory levels based on, historical sales data or forecasts, things like that. It could be things like pipeline analysis, fraud detection, cross-selling. This is really our first foray into the machine learning AI, places where we can train models to look at the past to a little bit, predict the future. And, in our world at Cavallo, this is one of the things that we are doing in the distribution area. So we have process intelligence as an example that will look at the way that your process has flowed in the past. How many items are going to back order, how many are going to the warehouse at different times of day, combine that with how fast people are picking, and we can predict, whether you're going to get all your orders out at the end of the day, or, what orders might be at risk of not being able to go out. Another example on sales and sales reporting side is being able to do employee coaching. So being able to figure out which customers we should be talking to, which customers might be at risk, and then being able to build out call lists and coach employees to talk to those customers. Those are examples of more of the predictive analytics. The last one is prescriptive analytics. So this is kind of full out into the machine learning, and some people are going to be very far away from doing this, but this is the area that you have to plan for and build your data up to get to the point where you'll be able to pull this out, eventually. And what this represents is being able to do machine learning models on very large data sets to answer questions of the data and to be able to simulate and do strategy. So you might be able to ask the system, how do I become more profitable? And it's able to do simulation, change a bunch of variables, and look for the best way to get to profitability. It doesn't need to know what all the individual variables are. That's where those models and that machine learning comes in, and that, those progressive algorithms. And so it can actually run through, and the more information that you can feed it, the more accuracy that you can get. And so this is where, this is previously a very large enterprise, previously, a very difficult place to get to. And honestly, I very rarely see this work well at the mid-market at this point, but you really want to be thinking about this is coming in a near time frame. And if you're not already starting to plan for how you're going to handle it, you're at risk of being left behind when it actually comes up, because ultimately the computational models and the horsepower to drive them is going to be available. But if you don't have your historical data to work with, then you're going to be out of luck. That's not something that you can recreate or really go back on. So it's really important to start to think about how you're feeding your data into the system, at this point. So some of the common challenges that people have with data and with being able to store the amount that's required is oftentimes there's still a lot of paper processes. The ERP is not the best at doing all of the functions that the business needs. ERPs are fundamentally a financial reporting tool. They produce a balance sheet, they produce a P&L, they produce financial reports, and all of those things are really important. They're important for companies to get credit. They're important to work with investors. They're important to even know your own performance. They typically are very lagging indicators, so we're not being very proactive with the data that we're getting out of it. But ultimately, the ERP is a financial system, and as you go out farther away from finance into the operations areas, it typically gets worse and worse at both executing the individual tasks and the data that's stored. And so, as users have paper processes or other systems, it can be challenging, because if you're printing out a piece of paperwork for picking and you're walking around the warehouse with it, none of that data is recorded. All you're getting is you created an order and eventually the system invoiced and shipped it out. There isn't any of that intervening data about what is happening. On the sales side, very similar. Most ERP systems are pretty poor at CRM. And so if your sales reps aren't recording their emails, their contacts, their interactions, all of those things that they're doing with customers, you're missing a very large piece of the puzzle from a data perspective. And so it's really important to start to think about how you are going to make that transition. And early on, it doesn't mean that you have to have an exact plan for how you're going to consume it, but it means in the early steps, just making sure that you're using the systems to track these things. It doesn't even have to be all in the same system, but just make sure that you have access to it and are starting to think about, what your digital footprint looks like. Where are your breadcrumbs? Where are you actually feeding the data information? And so it's important to make that plan and think about your data footprint. And a way to do that is to just take a look at your business from front to back and look for those places where, the system isn't being interacted with and the events that are happening are not being recorded. We're very cognizant at Cavallo of this particular area. We are very thoughtful about our event structures, about all the information that we're feeding the system. And we're really starting with what outcomes we want, what data then do we then need to feed it, and then putting that in there. Because it's you have to think about it, from the very beginning. If you don't, it doesn't mean you can't get to the place that you want to go to. You certainly can put it all back together later, but it's certainly helpful to start and think early. So taking your process, working it all the way through the order to cash cycle, if you're a distributor, or whatever your particular workflow is, and thinking about, okay, are there places where we're doing a lot of work that the system doesn't know about that we won't be able to recreate later? Because if we get to that point, then we won't have that information. We won't be able to make those determinations and insights later. And one of the ways that you can go through this process and solve it is making sure that you're using good pieces of software in the in-between. So the ERP, again, fantastic financial reporting tool. In different ERPs are better and worse at different things, but just make sure that you're supplementing it where required. Doesn't mean you have to go out and customize the ERP. You can buy add-ons to go help you in given areas. Good example of this is something like demand planning. There are lots of demand planning software packages out there that record tons of data and make great insights. And in that silo of demand planning, do a really good job, even being not just descriptive, but predictive. And then you'll have that data available for later to kind of recombine. So you don't have to do all of this with an in-house BI project to start with. You can definitely, take your time, build the data up from different systems along the way. So it can be very overwhelming if you're looking at it and saying, okay, I have to solve this entire problem, do a big BI project. Well, most companies aren't like that. You're growing organically. And so it's just important along the way, not specific which tools to use, but think about which tools you're using and are they, giving you what you need in the meantime, but also setting you up for success in the future. So thinking about it, from there. So after you have your ERP system, you're feeding it good data, you have independent packages, maybe in the warehouse, feeding you pick information, in inventory, doing stock levels, in CRM, recording sales and customer tasks. Well, where do you go from there? So after you have those projects, if you want to get to that sort of next level, your option is either to have used a single vendor that has put this all together for you, and you can just sort of plug it in and take steps, or you're in the boat of building out your own sort of intelligence cube. And I don't want to sugarcoat, what that looks like. It's definitely a challenge. Being a part of a company that has a data product and is very intentional about the way that we're building things, I know it's difficult to do. And so when you think about an in-house BI project getting to that point, it's really a couple FTEs of hiring. You're going to have a data scientist, you're going to have some data analysts, you're going to have organizational buy-in and a software package that puts it all together. And so what you have to start to think about is, what does that look like for your organization? Is it the right time to do that? And you have time to make that determination and think about it. More important to start recording the data now. This should get, easier later on. But you can have those people build that out. You have the organizational buy-in, build out your business intelligence roadmap, build out your analysis cubes, taking data from all of those systems, putting them together, and then, either buying or building, working with a vendor to do ML models to map against that. And what does that really get you? Well, at the end of it, you get really great insight into strategic decision making. So you can make great examples, from my sphere and distribution. You might want to ask where the best place to put your next warehouse is, and the system will be able to go through and look at all the factors, tweak things, simulate, and say, okay, based on the amount of sales volume, the cost of shipping, the highway structures, it's best for you to put a new warehouse in Nevada, in, California. And that's just an example. Maybe you want to ask on the more micro level, what's the right price to charge this customer? And that's driving that, that information farther down, from really strategic to kind of micro strategic for individual roles. And all of those are great examples of things that will come in the future as we're putting this together. And so if you can picture that future world, what you really have is great answers to almost all of your questions, and they don't even have to be well structured. You'll be able to ask the system and provide that. And it's not just a giant strategy project where people go heads down and, work on Excel sheets for a month and come back with the answer. It's almost instantaneous. And the way that we'll operate and think about it in the future is much more of that instantaneous, ask a question, get a really intelligent answer, and be confident that, the system has all of the information and has been trained to give this back to you. And that's really, when I'm designing and thinking about our products, that's the future that I'm designing for. And there are elements along the road now which are definitely possible, and they're great advancements. A lot of people struggle even on the descriptive analytics, getting the right information out of the system. And absolutely, there's a lot of benefit and gain to be able to do that now. But I think it's very important also to think about that future state and, where we will be in 5 to 10 years. Because if you are able to answer those questions on a quick basis with a high confidence rate, you're going to be ahead of your competitors. And being able to be nimble and being able to be certain about your decision making is really, really an important component of your business in the future. So that's most of what I wanted to cover today. Again, I work for Cavallo. We do software products specifically for distribution, business intelligence, also the execution features is like CRM, warehouse, inventory, those elements as well. So thank you. Thank you for listening today. And that's all.